We're here. We're at INTA. We've made it.
Let's do it. Let's begin here. The story starts.
The story starts here. So we had this little conversation, didn't we, back in a pub? Was it as long as a year ago? Maybe it was getting on for that, wasn't it?
Yeah.
And you said, let's go and break the stakes of the podcast.
Yeah.
And I thought that you'd fallen out of a tree or something and bashed your head. It seems to be sort of like...
Well, it worked for the Beatles. They did all right.
They did.
Billy Connolly.
It did, yeah. They've all done really...
Take that. Sort of. Robbie Williams didn't quite make it, but, you know.
But we're here. We're at INTA.
Yeah.
Did you have a good journey over?
I did, an aeroplane completely full of patent attorneys and trademark attorneys. It was amazing. Everywhere
So
I looked.
is there a collective for patent and trademark
Yeah,
attorneys?
but I can't say it on the podcast.
Okay. Fair enough. And, hotel good?
My hotel's good. We haven't talked about plumbing yet, Lee, and we're at least 18 seconds in. Any interesting plumbing incidents?
There might have been. I might have been kind of getting comfy in my bed. It's gone midnight. It's about half past midnight. And I listened to a podcast to get myself off to sleep.
Who?
It was, and the rest is history. It's Custer's Last Stand at the moment. We're going through. So I sat listening to that, and I heard from my bathroom like a pop, like that. Yeah. And then just a gush of running water.
Yeah.
So being a plumber, I ran to the bathroom, obviously, and quickly diagnosed on the grounds that I couldn't see water come from anywhere else. It must have been the toilet cistern.
Yeah.
Took the lid off the toilet cistern, and it was overflowing. But overflowing at the float valve had popped off, overflowing at a rate that the overflow couldn't quite cope with.
Oh, you told me about your amazing solution.
Yeah. So two amazing solutions. The first was to grab the phone and ring reception whilst continually flushing the toilet so that it couldn't overflow. But no one was answering the phone.
No.
Yeah. So my next sort of option was to sort of wring a towel, drape one end in the cistern, hang the other over the bath, which is right next to the cistern, so that capillary action would take the water out.
Did you invent that, or is that like a well-known trick?
No, it's a well-known plumber's trick. It's a well-known plumber's trick.
That's what towels are for now in my world.
Run down to reception, where I understood then why there was a delay, because the poor lady down there was dealing with about 40 guests that were checking in. Obviously, they'd come in a late night flight. Might have been might have been your late night flight, and checking in. Did manage to find a security guy who did manage to get me an engineer who did arrive in my room about 10, 15 minutes later, and clearly didn't have a clue what he was doing, but had. Now I know. So I said to him, "Have you got any spanners?" And he looked at me as if I'd come from another planet. I should have said wrenches. I now know I should have said wrenches.
Of course.
I now know my mistake. Yeah. But so I just scrabbled around in his bag, found a couple of spanners, fixed it.
Amazing story. The only disappointment is you didn't bring your own spanners
on
holiday.
Didn't think I'd need them.
It's not a holiday.
Didn't think I need them, and I did have to get a very heavy microphone and recording kit into my suitcase. So I didn't really have the weight allowance.
No plunger?
And no plunger.
Bring your plunger.
Lee Davis and Gwilym Roberts are the two IPs in a pod, and you are listening to a podcast on intellectual property, brought to you by the Chartered Institute of Patent Attorneys.
So, okay, this was one of our longer band sessions, and I feel quite guilty because we have a guest who is looking at us as if to say, why am I here? What have I got myself into?
But I didn't know you could do that with towels. I think he's also thinking that.
So there's learning for us all in this. David, I hope I'm going to get your name right, David. David Muls?
Yes, that's right. Yeah.
So David, you're at WIPO, aren't you? But I think you kind of want to talk in a more personal sort of capacity, yeah?
Yeah, whatever. You just go ahead and ask me what you want to know.
Well, tell us a bit about yourself. Kind of, who are you? What do you do at WIPO? How did you find yourself there?
I'm Belgian. I used to work when I was out of law school, I worked at Baker McKenzie in Belgium. And I was really a litigation attorney, but I had some IP cases. So that's my first contact with IP. But mostly I was a litigation guy. And then I was hired, it's quite a story. I was hired by, because the work in Brussels, I didn't feel, for me, it was international enough. Of course, Baker McKenzie is an international firm. But really, most of the clients are subsidiaries of American companies in Brussels, and a lot of the issues are national Belgian law. So it wasn't that international as I hoped. And I was looking for something a bit more international. And through some contacts, I was hired by a place, I don't know if you've ever heard of this place, it's called the Iran-US Claims Tribunal.
No.
Yeah, it's a very interesting place. So this is an arbitration tribunal that was created after the Iranian Revolution, because the Iranians seized a lot of U.S. assets, and of course the Americans froze the Iranian assets in the States, and then they made a deal, and one of the aspects of the deal was the creation of a tribunal to rule on expropriation claims.
Yeah.
And that was super interesting. I worked there for about 3 years. I worked for a judge, an Italian, and it was a tribunal, it was an arbitration tribunal, and the panel was one American judge, one Iranian judge, and one neutral judge. And I have to say that was really super interesting and got me really interested in true international stuff, I would say. Then I was hired by a joint in Geneva called the United Nations Compensation Commission, which was a body that was created after the first Gulf War to deal with all the war claims following the Iraqi invasion of Kuwait. Because it was a similar type of experience, so they looked for people with that type of experience. And I started working there in, I think, around 1993. And because there were hundreds of thousands of claims, many small claims, but hundreds of thousands of claims, we were one of the first to use IT systems to process claims, certainly in international context. So that was also quite interesting. And then what happened was WIPO at that time started the domain name process.
Right.
And they were looking for some people who had some lawyers who had litigation experience, but some feeling for technology and the internet. And because of that work in this United Nations Compensation Commission, I was hired by WIPO, and since then I've been in WIPO.
So you didn't come in with any real IP background or field?
Well, except for the stuff that I did in Brussels.
Yeah.
I did some copyright. I don't know if you remember this. I think
I
about my age. I
won't remember.
The Upjohn.
Gwilym might remember.
The Rogaine, the Upjohn. They had this product. Anyway, it was trademarks and fair competition.
Yeah.
That type of stuff. So, but not really at heart an IP person from the beginning. I'm more a litigation person.
How long have you been at WIPO? When did you?
Yeah, a long time. I started in WIPO in 1997.
Okay. Yeah.
So I'm part of the furniture.
How many director generals? Is it general
right,
director
yeah.
general? How many have you been through?
I was still there only 6 months when the box was there, the first one. So I overlapped with him for 6 months,
right?
Which is short, but I still had him. Then I had Idris, and then Guri and etc.
Yeah, wow.
Now, Mr. Tang, we still can't get on this podcast.
We haven't managed to get him on a podcast, but we have spoken to him. Well, certainly I've spoken to him. Yeah. Thank you. That was really fascinating. So,
can I ask you a question?
Yeah,
Just one quick question, because there's amazing, some of those things I've never heard of, a quite incredible sounding story. On that panel with the Iranian, the US, and the neutral judge, was it the same 3 judges over a long period, or did they rotate them?
Okay, so basically it was the same judges. So the tribunal had 3 chambers, each with 3 judges, and the judges were fixed. But of course, sometimes they just retired and they changed them, but they were not rotated per case. They were there for as long as they were appointed, I would say. So they did multiple cases.
So the personal dynamic must have been fascinating.
I mean, I could tell you scenes.
It could be a good backdrop for a rom-com. I don't know how, but it's such an interesting kind of people story.
It's very interesting, and one of the things that I really learned. I was quite young. Is that you see, there's different ways of winning a case, and typically one of the parties was technically very strong. I mean, very strong technically. Thorough. The other party was very shrewd, very clever, and it's not always clear who wins. So it's a different. It was very interesting. I tell you, it was really fascinating.
Good. Sorry, thank you. I was just thinking it through. That must have been amazing. They didn't like each other. That must have been awful as well. Can you imagine?
I didn't give it that much thought.
Well, no, because you sat there hearing after hearing, and you got to know each other, kind of like a married couple getting on each other's nerves the whole time. I can just imagine one judge saying something, they go, "Oh, here we go again. Here he is. He won't keep off that topic." And I'm writing it in my head.
Yeah.
Maybe if I can add one particularly sensitive point for the Iranians in those days was the so-called dual national claims. So these were people who had dual nationality, so Iranian and US nationality. And on the basis of their US nationality, they claimed against the Iranians, but in fact they were ethnically Iranian, and often they had lived their whole life in Iran. And that was very difficult for the Iranian side to swallow. And one of the big precedential cases was whether those claims would be allowed or not. Mm-hmm. But they were allowed. Okay. So those were particularly sensitive to deal with.
Stop derailing those.
Thank you. So you probably didn't read your email, so you wouldn't have known that David and I have chucked around a few potential topics to talk over, because you don't read your emails, do you?
I just know how amazing the team is. That's what I know.
And I'm going to... Could I just jump to the domain name thing first? I know we said that maybe we'd do that.
Yeah, it's a long time ago, though.
You told me it was a long time ago. But so I get quite fascinated about domain names and the top level domains and stuff like that. So WIPO had an involvement in that.
Yes.
Yeah. Just tell us a wee bit about.
All right. Well, I mean, I was in those days. Gary he wasn't yet DG. He was like at the senior levels, and yeah. That was really the early days of the internet. Yeah. I remember it was when I started in WIPO, I visited a company called Network Solutions. I don't know if you...
I know the name. Yeah, definitely know the name. Yeah.
They used to have the root server, I think, the physical possession of the thing. And I remember going there, and there was a guy from the company who was making a presentation. And one of the slides was, the commercial internet is coming. So, I really feel like a dinosaur when you...
It's interesting you say, because you kind of forget that there was an age before domain names. They're so kind of in your face now, aren't it?
So when this whole, when the whole question of ICANN and how to deal with the DNS came up, the trademark owners were very anxious about, how cyber squatting and how trademarks would be dealt with. And I think... there was a sort of an understanding at the government level that there would be need for some sort of process that would make sure that trademark owners could defend themselves in that context. And what was very unusual about it it was one of the first international processes that was created, but almost informally. You see, it was not it was not a treaty.
Yeah.
It was just a request by some governments. The Secretariat did consultations among all the stakeholders, and on the basis of these inputs, we came up with this process, the UDRP. The member states, if I remember well, they did bless it, but they never really got into the details of it. And then ICANN adopted it. And what was very unusual about it and very interesting was that it was the creation of an international process just in a couple of years.
Yeah.
Which is really exceptional. Yeah. I mean, if you look at, I'm sure you're aware that there's a diplomatic conference going on now, and obviously that's 20 years of negotiations. Yeah. But there was, I would say, the stars were aligned in such a way that was possible.
But it needed to be quick as well, didn't it?
Yes.
Yeah, the juggernaut had started rolling.
Yes. Yeah. Exactly. So it was a big success, and it was a novel way of dealing with things, certainly for an organization like WIPO.
Yeah, I really wanted to touch on it because you don't get a sense of how big a job that really was. The whole infrastructure we now understand, the internet to be, the World Wide Web to be, came from that piece of work. It's extraordinary.
I remember that because around then I was still doing a bit of trademark work, and we were starting to do domain name registration before anyone else could do it, and it wasn't commoditized. We did it. I hated every minute of it. But I remember Trevor Cook, a very wise lawyer, at that stage, really early on, said domain names, they're still useful, but actually in the end it's the search engines that are going to run things, not the domain names, which is pretty early insight. Very impressive comment from him.
Did you come across any sort of domain name squatters? Was that something you experienced?
I don't think we didn't. Did you?
Well, I know of it because there was just a really clever guy I was at school with, and he sort of spoke to me very early on about, I've got this thing going on, Lee. I'm buying up these names on this thing.
Sounds very British to me.
On this thing called the internet, and people are going to have to pay me thousands to. I don't think it worked, but that was his.
There was a direct parallel with trademarks actually, because this is me dredging my memory now, but I think it's called trafficking in trademarks, which is the same thing. People would register a trademark before Coca-Cola turned up or something, and then say I've got it registered, and that's what the use provisions and everything about, I think, isn't it?
Yeah. I had a conversation with the government official about the longer-term evolution of the trademark system, and the question that we debated was whether it's not becoming a bit more like the domain name system, where people grab stuff. I mean, it's always existed, bad faith trademark registration, but the volume and the speed is now obviously on a different scale. So, at least in certain countries, I think there's a much more. The trademark system is perhaps not looked at in the same way as in other countries, and the opportunities for grabbing is.
Yeah, we've done a segue again, haven't we? We've segued.
Do it.
We've segued into trademarks almost seamlessly. So you caused Gwilym and I to do a little bit of research for this, because we've not covered trademarks on the podcast that much, and we knew that the Madrid Protocol was one of your areas of expertise, and we really want to talk about that. But of course, it's not something that we're terribly familiar with. So we did do a little bit of reading up. So we've not come in entirely cold. But treat us as if we don't know anything about trademarks, David.
Okay, it's very simple.
You won't be far off the mark to do that. So.
It's actually quite simple. The way we explain it to business people is as follows. If you have a branded product or service that you export, you need to protect the trademark in all the countries that you're doing business with. And if you don't use the Madrid system, the end result is going to be that you're going to have a big headache and you're going to spend a lot of money. If you use the Madrid system, you're going to have less of a headache and you're going to spend less money. That's the essence of it. It's really a system that makes it more convenient and cheaper to get trademark protection abroad. That's essentially it.
Yeah, so it's kind of a one-stop shop for a multi-national.
Yes.
And do you assign countries, or do you get the whole block in one go? How does it supposed to
No,
work?
you have a designation system, so you have to choose them. A big difference, you're probably more in the patent area, a huge difference with the PCT. So you have the PCT, and then you have Madrid, Hague and Lisbon.
Yeah.
And Madrid, Hague and Lisbon have an international register, which means that the right is registered at WIPO. So, for instance, if somebody has a registration and later they want to change the address of the holder, they don't have to go to each country individually. You can come straight with us. Whereas the PST is more an application system. Once it goes into the national phase, you have to still go. So it's a more complete. And if you think about it, these Madrid and Hague systems the Madrid system was created in the 19th century. So these people were quite visionary. And it served its purpose, and it's growing, and of course, it has to adjust to the new world, I would say. But I think it's doing well. And,
so about 120 countries in?
It covers around 130 countries. Okay. Because EU is like a block.
Right,
Depends how you count it.
How you count it, yeah. But not the UK, not the US, as we understand. Is that right?
No. The UK and the US are members.
Are they?
Yes.
God.
And actually,
that's a bit of rubbish research I did this morning, then, wasn't it?
No. And the UK, interestingly enough, the system became very popular in respect of the UK after Brexit. Because before Brexit,
tell us, we do love a Brexit story.
Well, before Brexit, if you designated the EU, you were. Because the UK was in the EU, you were covered. Yeah. But after Brexit, if you designated the EU, you're no longer. You're still not covered.
Maybe that was where I got confused with our research this morning, the UK being out because of Brexit. Yeah. But that would make sense. Yeah.
So if you look at designation rates, the UK, I would say this, the Brexit experience has shown us, beyond any reasonable doubt,
don't do it,
that the Madrid system actually is very useful, because when the UK stepped out, it got used more.
Yeah.
So it was in some way a very good experience for us.
So it's a slightly smaller number of countries than the PCT, which is up to nearly 150 or something.
That's correct.
Isn't it?
Yeah. That's correct.
Why wouldn't a country be in it? Who isn't in it?
Yeah.
What happens? Why not?
Okay, so this is somewhat undiplomatic, but I hope my supervisors will forgive me. But, I would say...
say it anyway and beg forgiveness. That's a great way to go.
So, in many countries, a lot of the business of IP attorneys is incoming non-resident filings, which they file for foreign clients. And if a country becomes a member of the Madrid system, in that part of the work goes away because you file them and you don't need local attorney. And in many countries where there is not much experience with the system because it's a completely new system, people are anxious about its impact. And this is much more prevalent in trademarks than in designs or patents because the volume of work in trademarks is much higher.
Yeah.
So the livelihood is much more around trademarks than any of the other rights. But ironically, every country goes through this. It's not just, countries in certain parts in the world. For instance, very advanced countries when they joined Madrid now decades ago, but not that long ago, they had the same concerns, at least some communities in the countries. But what we consistently show is that if your country becomes a member, maybe the filing work gets reduced, but you have much more high-value work in terms of replying to provisional refusals, because the typical trend is that once a country becomes a member, the overall number of incoming filings increases.
Yeah.
So the pie gets bigger, and you get a different part of the pie. And if you look at countries like Germany and Switzerland and France, who have been members for many, potentially 100 years, the attorneys are completely comfortable with the system. So it's an adjustment. And we have to always spend an enormous amount of time trying to reassure attorneys and governments that it will not have a negative effect. And it works, but it takes a long time.
It is a perpetually recurring story in IP of creating new international corporations. Everyone complaining about it, saying our business is going to go. It happens, everyone embraces it, and there's loads more work.
Absolutely. It's true. It's like computers, you see. It's the same.
But we were talking about this on the walk to the conference where it's AI, isn't it? AI at the moment is the thing that's going to change. The world's never going to be the same. We're going to lose our jobs. Not going to happen. The world will just change.
I read about spreadsheets. Remember when spreadsheets were introduced, kind of Lotus Notes?
There is one person around this table who isn't on the podcast who currently is in a state of ecstasy with you mentioning the word spreadsheet.
Spreadsheets! Go Emily, spreadsheets! No, apparently when they were introduced, the entire accountancy business said, right, that's it, we're out of the job. Which has, of course, exploded because of the extra work you could do and the manipulation. So it's
faster, smarter, all of those kinds of things.
Yeah.
So you talked a little bit about the difference between PCT and Madrid, but you also mentioned, and this is where I struggled at Hague and Lisbon.
Yes.
So just for someone like me who really doesn't understand trademark system at all, what is the distinction, if there is any, between...
They're all good city breaks.
They are all good city breaks,
an important point.
But Madrid, Hague, Lisbon, what do they actually mean? It's that... Are they extensions of the same treaty or different negotiations?
No, they're different treaties. I would say they are treaties of the same family.
Okay.
So one-stop shops with international registers. So they're like very much like the Madrid system. But the Madrid system is for trademarks.
Yeah.
The Hague system is for designs.
Right.
And Lisbon is for geographical indications.
Gotcha. Okay. I'll try and remember that now. In my mind, they all get kind of conflated into trademarks. I don't know why that happens. But
so geographical indications, I don't think we've ever touched on those.
I have never touched on GIs. No.
And this one's quite good at those. We should do, actually.
Yeah.
But how big is the uptake for Lisbon?
Okay, so this is an interesting question. I think Lisbon is quite successful, to be honest. Of course, it's never going to be anything like Madrid or Hague because the total number of GIs in the world is by definition fairly limited. But the strength of a system like Lisbon is that the products which it covers are very often considered by the country of origin as part of its national heritage.
Yeah, identity,
Yeah, identity. Yeah. So it's not just a commercial thing. And because of the identity and the national heritage, there is a strong emotional bond to the product and therefore to any system that is designed to protect that product. And we see that in many countries that have, historically been perhaps a little bit more reserved about the IP system, that they are extremely interested in GIs because they have products that are very, very high quality because of the, environmental environment.
Sure.
And they do manage to commercialize them at a higher price because of the branding.
Yeah.
And then the Lisbon system helps in that regard. And that's why this is also somewhat perhaps at the limit of what I can say, but I think it's useful to say this, is that the countries who look at the GI and say, well, it's really the same thing as a trademark, you can do the same thing as a trademark, they are probably right from a technical point of view, from an IP technical point of view, but it doesn't really resonate with the sovereignty, the national heritage thing. And this is very important.
Basically, there are some countries that have things that qualify for GI and they quite like them, and there are others that don't, I suspect, and don't see the point of them. Possibly, I don't know. They could do it.
Well, I think any country could have GIs. I mean, I think any country in the world probably has some product that they grow or make that they could qualify as GI. It's more of a legal tradition, you see. The GI is a long tradition in certain parts in the world and is not at all a tradition in other parts of the world. And of course, there are commercial interests at stake. But I'm just trying to explain to you why the Lisbon is, for certain countries, quite an attractive proposition.
We actually said that GI stands for geographical indication at any point, just in case.
Yes, we did. Yeah, we did that. But you say, and what's it say again?
Geographical indication, not general infantry. Like G.I. Joe. I just thought about that. That'd be awful.
Well done.
Imagine getting that confused.
Yeah.
So Lisbon's basically for soldiers. No. Anyway, carry on.
It's probably random little deviations.
You guys remind me of some BBC program I used to watch when I was a kid.
Oh, no. It's not.
I think it was like Monty Python.
I do wonder sometimes if we're like Alas Smith and Jones. That's
Bill and Ben.
Weed. So
back to the game.
Yeah, we'll cut all of that. Obviously.
No,
I know we won't.
That's doing Flowerpot men impressions. It's important.
It would be unfair of us, since we've got you here, David, if we didn't ask you whether you could give us any insight into what's coming over the hill from WIPO next. Are there any big things on the horizon that we should know about?
Well, yes, there are. I would say these two diplomatic conferences are, of course, huge. They are both being held this year. One is being held now.
Yeah, tell us, the listeners won't know, so tell us a little bit about them. What are they?
All right, so the one that's being discussed now and is a potential or possible new treaty on genetic resources in patent applications. So you have to disclose the origin of a genetic resource.
Sort of Nagoya, we perhaps might know
something
as in the past. Yeah.
So that's the one. And that's one that's been negotiated for many, many years, 20 years already, and now it's culminating in this diplomatic conference. And then the next one in November is probably something that you might be more familiar with, is the Design Law Treaty, which is like a formalities treaty for designs. And that's going to be discussed in Saudi Arabia. So that's a major thing for these years. Another big thing, I'm sure everybody is dealing with that, is AI, of course.
Yeah.
We think, we're a bit like your attitude, we want to make use of it. We're not afraid of it. Of course, we have to be careful on all these things, but we already have, for instance, our staff are already allowed to draft paper documents using a language model that we've installed on our own.
Oh, it's your own one?
Yeah, it's like off the shelf, but it's installed in a secure way so that the data doesn't go out. And we'll have to see how that will impact the work. I've been there for such a long time. I remember when I was in the PCT, we still had people who were pushing around cards with with files. That disappeared. Then the formalities examination, got very significantly affected by automation.
Yeah.
And I think now it's going to eat into probably the professional levels.
Yeah, undoubtedly. I think we missed a trick. If we had called it really useful intelligence instead of artificial, I don't think people would be so nervous about it.
Yeah. Or artificial really helpfulness.
Yeah. It's the
two together.
It's the unknown bit, the kind of how it's going to impact. And one of the things that we've got a watching brief on, because you'll know that the UK is in the process of acceding to the CPTPP, Comprehensive and Progressive Agreement for Trans-Pacific Partnership.
So good at that.
So we've got a kind of eye on the work that's happening around patent law harmonisation grace period, which we know that WIPO's leading on, and we've got kind of a not necessarily influence in there, but we've got a sort of an interest in that, haven't we?
I think it's known that we know what we're talking about, so people ask us.
Anything else that we should know? Are they the biggies? If not, I have another question for you.
Well, I mean, in my area of work, I would say I think the main job is to make the Madrid system adjust to the new world. You see, and that has various dimensions. One of clearly is IT, and more IT, and the other one is the geographic use of the system. So let me talk about IT and the Madrid system used to be mostly a European system. For the longest period of its history, most members were European, and those countries had fairly homogeneous trademark practices.
Yeah.
And then, of course, to make the system more attractive, especially when the EU trademark came along, it was a matter of survival for the system to become an international system. And I think that succeeded, clearly succeeded. But of course, because we attracted so many more countries, there are many more shades of grey in the system between the practices of the various countries, because these countries are less uniform in their historical trademark culture. For instance, the US trademark practice is very different from the European.
Yeah.
So you have more divergence in the system. And I think one of the big tasks which will go on, long after I retire, is to try to make the system as coherent as possible between the Office of Origin, the International Bureau, and the designated offices.
Yeah.
And a very good example of that, which is the classification area, it's a headache.
Yeah.
And so if one of our jobs, I think, at WIPO is to try to make that a smoother experience. And the IT can help a lot in that domain. So that's a big job for us, make the system more coherent. And this is a strategically very important thing, to make sure that all the new big players in the system feel that they are recognized in the system. And this is about the language discussion. I don't know if you know about this, but the three official languages of the Madrid system currently are English, French, and Spanish. But of course now there are users from many other parts of the world, and they would like to have their languages added to the system, which is a source of anxiety for the existing users, especially in the more, I would say, Western countries. But for those new countries, it's very important that they are recognized in the system. Like the PCT has 10 publication languages. You see, we only have 3 languages. So these are very big debates that will play out in the next years. One thing that I've learned in my job in WIPO, progress is very incremental. It's like a glacier that moves. Yeah. But it's not necessarily a bad thing. It can't always happen quickly. It's just not possible. Too many conflicting views and interests, so you have to give it the time to settle.
I was going to ask if I may.
Yeah.
I've always been interested how international IP is, in the sense that there are an amazing number of international and well-observed conventions knocking around for the different types of IP. Probably going back to the Paris Convention, I think it was all started, which is 1880 something. I can't remember. It's well old.
You're impressive, aren't you?
What's that?
Oh, your knowledge.
Such a cultured man.
Yeah.
Well, I had to study it for my exams. That's right. Anyway, I passed them, clearly. No, but that's really interesting. For that to be there was, again, the foresight of that for a system that maybe it's slightly anachronistic in some ways, but still works really, really well. And then we sort of a huge burst of activity in the 70s with PCT and EPC and so on. And then we've got your repos and your WIPOs and all the great work that that WIPO does. Has it peaked?
Yeah, that's a very interesting question. I was at the FICPI conference several months ago where I was in some panel and it was the same question.
Okay.
And what we did was we made a statistical analysis. So we looked at all the WIPO treaties and all the amendments and we plotted them over a timeline to have some historical perspective as to whether we've peaked or not.
Yeah, yeah.
And the result was that there was a very intense period between the 50s and the 70s.
Yeah.
But the current level of activity is the same as before that peak period.
Right, okay.
So maybe we haven't peaked, maybe we're going back to normal.
Interesting. I like that.
That's a good one.
I think it's partly, because I suspect there's a period of international regrowth in that era anyway,
yes,
which would have driven a kind of a collaborative kind of mentality, maybe. But also possibly people didn't quite have their heads around just how valuable IP was going to become, because I think IP is intellectual property is quite a new term in many ways, and now people say, the balance sheet is all the intangible IP and all that kind of thing. That's kind of a new conversation since the 80s and 90s. So I wonder, I've got a little pet theory that it was a lot easier to sign off an agreement on something you didn't think was very important.
Oh, for sure.
Whereas these days everybody's super aware of the...
You're absolutely right. I mean, I remember even when I was a younger person, it was much easier in WIPO to get a consensus because a lot of countries didn't look too closely, you see. But now everybody is very aware, much more aware and much more mature in assessing whether something is in their interest or not. And therefore it is more complicated. But that doesn't necessarily mean it's a negative thing. It's just more complicated.
Yeah. Well, I'm predicting, Lee, that in future podcasts we're going to be talking about TRIPS a little bit. We've got some interesting people coming up, as you know, and I think it'd be interesting to talk about what impact that's had.
Yeah, so it's an interesting thought. So we are at INTA, and we probably ought to ask an INTA question. This is our kick-off INTA podcast. Are you here for the gig, David? Are you speaking? I can see from your lanyard that's got speaker on it that you're speaking.
I want to talk about those ribbons soon.
Yeah. So come on, show us your ribbons. What have you got there? You got.
I saw one yesterday called Jerk, but I decided not to put that on.
So you've got government delegate.
That's cool.
Speaker, exhibitor.
Yeah, speaker. So you're speaking. Have you done your speaking slot yet, or have you yet to do it?
No, not really. I mean, we have every year we have a special sort of breakout on historic was Madrid and Hague, like latest updates.
Yes, standard stuff. Yeah.
But this year we opened it up a bit because INTA is more and more interested in the broader range of IP issues. So we have now a breakout not only on Madrid and Hague, but also on the arbitration center.
Okay, yeah.
And also on the global brands database. And that's tomorrow. I'm just gonna introduce my colleagues who will present all the things. And then we have a booth. We always have a booth.
Oh, I'll come and find you.
Yeah, we have lots of goodies and chocolate and stuff.
Oh, chocolate.
You said you wanted chocolate, didn't you?
Doing some chocolate.
So now you know where to go.
And I'm really interested in WIPO and its activities as
Very
well.
good Swiss chocolate.
These two things. Swiss chocolate.
I highly recommend it.
So we're...
And we met with the leadership yesterday, so we have our...
We
have extremely good relationships with INTA. The DG knows Etienne very well. They're quite close, so we always get well received and we enjoy coming.
If I may plug into quickly, because as we've observed, they've been super generous and let us do a lot of stuff. It's an amazing opportunity to meet such a huge cross section of the IP community. So I can imagine, because I know I've met, is it Matt Bryans?
Yes.
Brian.
Matt Bryans is PCT guy.
He comes to APA. Mm-hmm. And again, I think he really cherishes the opportunity to come to talk to people involved at such a high level for so many countries. So presumably INTA's one of the main targets for that kind of coverage.
It's the biggest gathering for sort of brand trademark. Yeah, and we come with quite a lot of people. I think we're about 8, and we try to show what we do, any sort of initiatives that would be of interest to brand owners. So it's a big event for us, absolutely.
Oh, yeah, I hope you have a really great conference where we'll come and look up at the booth, definitely. But we always finish the podcast on a little bit of a tangential question. I've got one, Gwilym. I've come up with a tangential question. Actually, it's not that tangential this time.
Oh, okay.
So I'll ask Gwilym first, then I'll come to you, and then Gwilym will surprise me by asking me the same question. Obviously, we've only done this 100 odd times, so it's clearly it is entirely a shock to me when I get asked it. So we started off talking about domain names. So Gwilym, I want to know, have you got a favourite domain name? And have you ever come across a domain name where you thought, oh no?
Can I just answer with something a bit like your question?
Yeah, of course you can. Yeah. You've never answered one of my questions.
No. So my daughter's name is her Elizabeth or Beth.
Yeah.
Surname Cruz Roberts, which is half kind of the Spanish way of doing it. Yeah. My wife's Spanish, so I got Roberts from me and Cruz from my wife. And then I named her after my grandma.
Yeah.
Whose full name was Dorothy, but we all called her Dot. No, we were never allowed to call her Dot.
That's right. I'm getting there. I'm starting to get there.
We were never allowed to call her Dots. She would slap you. But, that was what her friends called her. So I always loved the name Dots. So Beth's full name is Elizabeth Dots Cruz Roberts. Everyone just says it sounds like a domain name.
Yeah, can you answer my question now then or not? No?
That was it. I'm not... No, I know, when I get to you, I know you'll have a really good answer. But there you go.
Of course I do.
What I have done is I've bought David some thinking time because this one's coming your way.
But David was there at the beginning, so he's going to know the really early ones.
You're saying it's his fault.
Yeah. David, have you got a favourite domain name? And have you got? Did you ever come across anywhere you thought, oh no, don't use that?
I remember once a case where somebody challenged the domain name for a trademark that was like at the 7th level, and I thought maybe that's going a bit far. That's the only thing that sort of sticks out in my mind.
Lee.
Should I answer it then?
I'm going to amaze you. I say, what about you?
Well, I've got. I'm not a domain name squatter, but I've got a couple that I'm saving for a rainy day because I do think that at one point my SEPA life might come to an end, and I might do a bit of consultancy. So I have sitting on the shelf ready to go, Pediscus.com.co.uk, etc., which is a little bit of a play on the Latin pedisco, which means to learn through experience and doing. Okay. Oh, okay. So I've always thought that was what I would call my consultancy. So it's there on the shelf for me, kind of, because I like playing with Latin words and stuff.
That's a word that you don't. I obviously don't hear the Latin, but I can't think of any kind of an anglicisation of it.
There isn't. It's not used. It's absolutely not used. And when I came across it, I thought that's great because it's trademarkable. I've got that as well. So I know how easy it is to file trademarks. It's DOS. Yeah. So I've got trademark.
I've worked out the logo, the image.
Yeah.
It's Podiscus, right? Yeah. You remember Po from the Teletubbies?
Yeah.
It's like a frisbee with a Teletubby on it.
Yeah, except it's P-E-R, but never mind. That almost works. It's just my accent. And then on the kind of like all cringe one, we once, when we were thinking about getting a new CMS system at SEPA, content management system, that's what makes websites work. Yeah. Right. Okay. So we had a range of people come to give us demonstrations, and one guy sat there and was giving us this demonstration, and he then showed us a piece of work that he was doing, and he was working on something, and I need to be very careful about how I say this because I always say it in the way that I then read it. It was Therapist Registry.
Oh, I know. Yes, I've seen that. It's really questionable. Yeah, he is very careful.
Yeah. And when you swear, and when he put it up on the screen, it was like, bin that one.
Yeah.
I think famously there are other versions of it, but this was the first time I'd actually seen anyone kind of put it out.
Anyone who hasn't put that out, write it down. And then,
Oh, David, thank you for taking time out of your busy INTA schedule and spending it with us on the podcast. This will be our first one to go out. How exciting. That's so exciting.
I like to be in America. I forgot to do it.
He did. So I don't know whether you're listening to this podcast because you're at INTA and you're listening to it for the first time, or whether you're one of our seasoned listeners, but however you've come to the podcast, if you've liked it, if you've enjoyed it, then leave us a review on your platform of choice, because then we can extend our listenership.
That's exactly how the Beatles broke America.
Was it?
Yeah. Just it was all about reviews on.
Are you John and my Yoko?
Yes.
Perfect. I'll see you on the next one.
Yes.